Kartum prakrtim Kartum Prakratim Iyushaha Prabhavam Paurusham Prahu Kalam Yege Yadobhayam Ahankara Abhimudhasya Kartum Prakratim Iyushaha. Synonyms: Prabhavam, the influence; Paurusham, of the Supreme Personality of Godhead; Prahuhu, they have said; Kalam, the time factor; Yege, some; Yadaha, from which; Bhayam, fear; Ahankara Vimudhasya, deluded by false ego; Kartuhu, of the individual soul; Prakratim, material nature; Iyushaha, having contacted. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, S.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: the influence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is felt in the time factor, which causes fear of death due to the false ego of the deluded soul who has contacted material nature. Purport: the living entity's fear of death is due to his false ego of identifying with the body. Everyone is afraid of death. Actually, there is no death for the spirit soul. But due to our absorption in the identification of body as self, the fear of death develops. Is also stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam, 11th canto, 2nd chapter, 37th verse. Bhayam didiya bhini veshtada. Bhayam didiya bhini veshadaha syad. Didiya refers to matter, which is beyond spirit. Matter is the secondary manifestation of spirit. For matter is produced from spirit. Just as the material elements described are caused by the Supreme Lord or the Supreme Spirit, the body is also a product of the spirit soul. Therefore, the material body is called Dvidiya, or the second. One who is absorbed in the second element or second exhibition of the spirit is afraid of death. When one is fully convinced that he is not his body, there is no question of fearing death, since the spirit soul does not die. If the spirit soul engages in the spiritual activities of devotional service, he is completely freed from the platform of birth and death. His next position is complete spiritual freedom from the material body. The fear of death is the action of the Kala, the time factor, which represents the influence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In other words, time is destructive. Whatever is created is subject to destruction and dissolution, which is the action of time. Time is the representation of the Lord. And it reminds us also that we must surrender unto the Lord. The Lord speaks to every conditioned soul as time. He says in Bhagavad Gita that if someone surrenders unto him, then there is no longer any problem of birth and death. We should therefore accept the time factor as the Supreme Personality of Godhead standing before us. This is further explained in the following verse. Om Ajnanatirmirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadadhi Swapadandigam Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Yudapadakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajadam Sahagana Raghunathanidam Tam Sajivam Sadhuidam Savadudam Parijana Sahidam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalidam Shri Vishakhanidamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpade Gopesha Gopika Kanda Radha Kanda Namostude Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sude Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpatarupasya Kripa Sindhubhye Cha Padidanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Hare. Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Om Namo Namo Aniruddhaya Rishikeshindriyatmane. Namaha Paramahamsaya Purnaya Navurtatmane. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, dear devotees. Thanks again for this very auspicious Srimad Bhagavatam class. We were going through this chapter. Chapter is titled as the fundamentals of the material nature. Here, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Kapiladev, is explaining about the material energy of the Lord. In the beginning of itself, Kapiladev was mentioning that the Supreme Personality of Godhead absorbed this material energy with the three modes of material nature. That means the Supreme Lord absorbs this material energy. In the Bhagavad Gita also we can see that the Supreme Lord himself says this, that I am this different separated energy. This material energy is my separated energy. Bhumirapo nalo vayu kam mano buddhirevacha ahangara midyame bhinna prakritirashtadaha. So Supreme Lord himself says this. So here Kapiladev is revealing this about the material nature and how this is man. So Kapiladev was mentioning that Supreme Lord himself absorbs this material nature. So throughout this chapter, Kapiladev is explaining that how that material nature is manifested. So then the context of this material energy, of this material nature, Kapiladev was mentioning about that the material consciousness is the cause of the conditioned life. So this in the context of this material energy. Kapiladev is saying that the material consciousness is the cause of the conditioned life, in which the living entities are put under various conditions by the material energy. So this is very important to understand. So this material energy is the cause of our conditioned life. And why that material energy is why that conditioned life? Because of various material consciousness. So when we have this. So basically Kapiladev is mentioning that, so we are into this material world, we are separated from the Supreme Lord. We came into this material world because of our material consciousness. This is actually enforced by the material energy. So then Kapiladev was mentioning, okay, what is that material energy? This is the question Sri Mother Devahuti is raised, then requested to Kapiladev that can you please elaborate and explain to me that what is that material energy, how the Supreme Lord absorbs and manifested in this material energy, and how the Supreme Lord manifested, how the various material energies of the Lord, how the Supreme Lord manifested and unmanifested in this material energy. That's where Srila Kapiladev was started to mention to Mother Devahuti that yes, Supreme Lord absorbed this material energy, and when it is absorbed into the unmanifested state, it is known as the Pradhan, the unmanifested material nature. So then it is mentioned that this is an amalgamation or the aggregation of that total material energy in an unmanifested form. In 11th Canto, Srila Sukadeva Goswami also explaining again this into the this to the Parishit Maharaj, that it's mentioned that this Pradhan is also an eternal energy or eternal, and it's always there. It's always in the as an mold of initial energy of the Lord in order to create this material nature. So then, like we can see that, like just for a seed of a banyan tree, when the seed of a banyan tree is so small, so tiny, but that entire the banyan tree, the nature of the banyan tree, how many branches, how many twigs, how many leaves, how many, what's the qualities and the characters and the behavior, everything is actually there in that, the tiny seed of that banyan tree. Then as soon as then it is put in the soil and it start to manifest. So when it comes, it's been manifested, then it's manifest as a big gigantic banyan tree. So like that, the seed, this pradhan is considered as a seed, this amalgamation, total summum bonum of all this material energy, which is not manifested as in that pradhan, which is mentioned that there is no sun, there is no moon, there is no various elements of earth, water, fire, air, ether. It's also an amalgamation, aggregation of this total energy. That's the pradhan. So then Kapiladev was mentioning about that the manifested nature of that pradhan is prakriti. Then Kapiladev was mentioning about is there are 24 great elements that's called the Mahat Tattva, which manifest as a banyan tree, how it sprouts like various leaves, various branches, various twigs, various fruits, and various flowers. So similarly, that pradhan, then it start to sprout and manifest. That's we call it as, or it is known as prakriti, or the manifested material nature. So Kapiladev also further mentioning that everything is a transformation of that superior energy, that supreme Lord. Everything is. Then Srila Prabhupada also writes in the purport that this material nature, everything is a transformation, or the matter is a transformation of the spiritual potency. Matter cannot stay itself, or stay itself, or it cannot manifest, it cannot do anything, it's on. So it needs that the spiritual potency. So the all is a manifestation of that spiritual potency, that material nature. That's why it's revealing that the Lord is revealing that this material energy is my separated energy, which manifests from the spiritual potency of the Lord. Then Kapiladev was explaining about these various elements that which manifested, that's called prakriti. And that prakriti is consist of that the three modes of material nature, which is the results of the false ego. Then it is actually further divided. And then based on that, this material energy came as these 24 elements. There is gross elements, and as it's already been explained, I'm just summarizing it. Then there are subtle elements. There are 5 gross elements. There are 5 subtle elements. Then there are karmendriyas. That means the sense of, the working senses. Then there are sense of perceptions, jnanendriyas. Then there are the inner senses. That's the word uses that inner senses. That's the 4 elements, which is mind, intelligence, and false ego. Then contaminated consciousness. So it's very important, this contaminated consciousness. So anybody in this material world has this contaminated consciousness. So these are the 24 elements. Then in the previous verses, Kapiladev was mentioning that, and then Lord added the time factor, the time factor into these elements. That's called 24 elements. No, that's the 25th element. Lord added the time factor. The 24th element is a contaminated consciousness. So then Kapiladev says that when the Lord added the time factor, then it became the Saguna Brahman. Saguna Brahman means the qualified Brahman. Then it is as the qualities, guna, that's the 3 modes of material nature, various aspects. And then there is dualities, there is birth, there is death, there is day and the night, there is happiness, distress, there is pain and the pleasure. All these dualities are manifested. These are the natures of the Saguna Brahman, or the qualified Brahman. Then the opposite of that qualified Brahman is known as Nirguna Brahman. Nirguna Brahman, which is that completely eternal. In that Nirguna Brahman, there is no time factor, which is eternal. There is no dualities. There is no, birth, death, or there is no happiness, distress. There is heat or cold. As it's mentioned, there is no sun, there is no moon. This is called Nirguna Brahman. So when when people confused with this various, terms or various understanding of this, then people say that, oh, Lord doesn't have any qualities. Nirguna Brahman, Lord does not have any of this material, he does not have any form. He is Nirakar, he is, Nirvikar, he does not have any feeling. He is Nirakar, Nirvishesha, there is no, qualities or no specific characteristics. So because of they are not understanding properly what is this material energy and what is the spiritual energy. That everything that Supreme Lord, spiritual Nirguna Brahman has, that in a spiritual quality. That is completely spiritual, in the spiritual form. So then the Kabila Dev was mentioning about that when the time is added to these elements in the material nature, which is become saguna or become qualified. So that's where we came to this verse, and then Kabila Dev mentioning that the influence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead felt in the time factor. So this is exactly that we need to understand, which causes the fear of death due to the false ego of the deluded soul who has contacted material nature. So whoever is actually in contact with this material nature, pretty much everybody in the contact with this material nature, and then they all feel the influence of time factor in the form of death, bewilderment, birth, death, happiness, distress. All these are actually the product or the result of this time factor. As we can see that everything moves, everything changes in this world. So here it is mentioned that the influence of Supreme Person Godhead felt in the time factor. I remember I was reading this article. There is a great scientist. He was known as nuclear scientist. His name was Robert J. Oppenheimer. Robert J. Oppenheimer, he was the first person who detonated a nuclear bomb. He developed and created this nuclear bomb. He brought it into the New Mexico in 1945, July 16. And he was very much, worked on it. And then on the day he detonated this nuclear bomb, and then he was watching this from the far distance. He saw that the fireball of the entire nuclear, that bomb created such a fireball that he couldn't even imagine that it would come up like this. It's a huge fireball. And that time he mentioned that it was become very, popular, that he mentioned that he remembered and recollect. He told that now I remember a word which is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, which is mentioned that in the Hindu scriptures, Hindu text, the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says this word, kalos me, in mention that time I am the devourer of, the destroyer of all this material world. So this Robert J. Oppenheimer, he was not a proponent of this Bhagavad Gita student, or he's not a believer, he's not anything. But that moment when he saw that everything is devoured by the huge fire, the devastation, and he could see that the Lord, mentioned that the Lord, the time I am, the Kala, the devouring potency of the Kala Shakti, the devouring potency. So then he was mentioning this, quoting this word, that time I am the destroyer of the worlds, and he could feel it. So similarly, and this exactly that the same thing is mentioning here, that Supreme Personality of Godhead felt in the time factor. He could see that the time factor, the Kala Shakti, devouring potency, that's a Kala Shakti means the devouring potency of the Supreme Lord. It takes up everything. So we know that there are 4 kinds of annihilation. There is a Naimitiga annihilation, that means occasional annihilation. You know that the Brahma, when the day of Brahma, that's called one kalpa, that is 1,000 yuga cycle, then 3 planetary systems are actually submerged in the water, submerged and completely immersed. That's the time when Brahma goes, then what happened? All the living entities, everything goes back to the body of Garbhodakshaya Vishnu. That Lord absorbs everything. Everything goes back to the body. This is called occasional, or called the Naimitiga annihilation. This is also another Kala Shakti, or the time factor of the Lord. Then there is a Prakritika. There is a total there is a Prakritika. Prakritika means natural. Natural annihilation, which is or the devastation, which is also the influence of the time factor, which is actually controlled by the Supreme Lord. And then it is mentioned that when the one lifespan of the Brahma is over, then everything, even the 7 elements of this Mahat Tattva, due to the influence of the time factor, which goes back to the body again, to the Purusha, the Karana Purusha, the Mahavishnu, everything goes back to the body of Mahavishnu that time, when there is a Prakritika. So how it is happens, even the seven elements. Even we know that everything this manifests also due to that. When Lord adds the times into it, then everything manifests in this world. Like we know that from the sky, from the ether, the air manifests, from the air the fire manifests, from the fire the water manifests, from the water the earth manifests. When there is air, there is a sense of hearing, and from there is air, there is ether, then there is a sense of sound, hearing, and then there is an air, then that sense of touch is there, and then again the sense of sound and sense of touch. So all this manifests. When the earth is there, then there is a sense of smell. When the water is there, the sense of taste, and everything is there. So when there is a time factor influence, then what happens? All these are actually then going back to that in that similar way. Then what happens? Earth will submerge, merge into the water. Then water will goes back to the fire. Fire goes back to the air. Air goes back to the ether. And all these different elements, that's the seven elements of it, the sensual and all this such sense of touch, the smell, and all this actually goes back to the body of Mahavishnu. So this is also the time factor. So it is mentioned that very beautifully in the Srimad Bhagavatam, when the time comes when this Prakritika annihilation manifests, that's the time that the Kala Shakti, the Supreme Lord, the potency, the devouring potency, agitate Lord Sangarshana. When Lord Sangarshana agitated by this Kala Shakti, then he just shake his hoods. This is the time also the Lord Shiva, he is also another expansion of this Kala Shakti, the potency or the Sangarshana. Then he also wakes up, and he also started to dance in such a way that the entire universe is shaken. And then when their universe is shaken, and that's where then these thousands of years that are really full of this shaken and the dance and falls down one by one burning. It says that when the fire comes from the mouth of Sangarshana, then it burns down everything, and then when it burns down, then there is a tremendous heat which creates, and in that time nothing won't be there, and after that many years then there'll be a unstopping water, and this entire universe will be, there is only one sink with water, there is nothing left. Then everything that then further goes back to the body of Mahavishnu, nothing left when the Brahmas goes. This is called Prakartika. Then there is an annihilation called the Atyantika. This is the most important. This is where in this purport, the Srila Prabhupada writes that then what one has to remember and feel that the time factor of the Supreme Lord in front of us, in before us, that which reveals that Sukadeva Goswami reveals so nicely that when there is an Atyantika, when there is an ultimate, Atyantika means ultimate annihilation. Ultimate annihilation means when we understand that we are influenced by this material nature, material energy, when one is actually completely free from it, completely free from that, these are all the influence of material energy. The material energy is influenced by this Maya, the potency of the Maya, then influence and illusion this living entity, and completely he was in the influence of this time factor. He was always in the birth, death, old age, diseases, these dualities, happiness, distress, and all. Because of this is an influence of that time factor, and through the illusory potency of the Lord. Then, but when one completely understands and come to this realization and the conclusion of that, he is nothing to do with this material energy. He is not this material body. He is a completely a spiritual. And this is the time when completely devours everything, that there's nothing to do with this material energy, material, this 24 elements, but he is a spirit soul. That's the time he get the liberation. That is called Atyantika. This is also influenced, and it can be influenced by the Lord. That Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport, the time factor, the influence of the Lord in front of us, before us, then one has to see that this time factor is within us. That means that the death is going to come. That's why Kala, the death is going to come to us. But when the death is going to come to us, then because of our material consciousness, we are going in this material world again and again. That's our conditioned life. But Atyantika means one has that understanding and come to this point of that we are completely spiritual potency, spiritual energy, nothing to do with this material world. This material world is temporary. This is actually subject to this destruction, subject, but the soul, spirit soul, is not subject to the destruction. That's why in the spiritual form, spirit is known as, spirit soul is known as, is eternal. There is the spirit soul, the time cannot be affected spirit soul because he is eternal. That's why the spiritual realm, spiritual abode is completely eternal. There is no time factor there. There is no duality there. There is no, day or night. There is like that. But everything is in a pastimes arrangements by the in order to create the pastimes, in order to makes beautiful pastimes of the Lord. Then there are various aspects there in the spiritual realm. But other than that, there is no time factor. There is no dualities there. So, as is mentioned that, then there is also a annihilation. That's the Kala Shakti is called constant. Constant means there is nitya, the word which is nitya. Every moment there is an annihilation. This is also an influence of the Kala Shakti. We know that our nails are growing, our hairs are growing. We see that sun is staying in one place, but sun is also moving like anything, right? So it is very, very beautiful to see that, but we don't feel it. But the time factor is there are a constant change. It is mentioned that by 7 years, the entire cells of the body is recreated. It's all the momentarily it dies and the next moment it creates. So this annihilation and the creation happens every moment. This is also an influence of this kala, this time factor. So because of the influence of this time factor, this entire prakriti that you mentioned, especially remember that the prakriti moves as per the time factor, the influence of the time factor. It is mentioned that, so we have to understand that Srila Prabhupada put a very nicely put on the purport that the clouds are created by the sun. The clouds are created by the sun, and then also that clouds is visible by the sun. So similarly, that is entire movements of this prakriti is actually created by the Supreme Lord, and because of that, the potency of the Supreme Lord time factor that we experience it. So similarly, the cloud is created by the sun, and by the sun only that we can view that the cloud. Then it is also mentioned that with that the same potency of the sun, that the cloud is also scattered. And when the cloud is scattered, then we can see the sun very clearly. Similarly, with that potency only that before the sun. So this gives us that the feeling of that the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the time factor. That's also we have to feel when we understand this. So similarly, when by the sun only, the potency of the sun only, then again the cloud is scattered, cloud is destroyed. So similarly, the potency of the Lord that we should utilize for the service of the Supreme Lord, that this is also the energy of the Supreme. So we have to see that everything is as an energy of the Supreme Lord. Then this way that we can always in realization, and we can engage ourselves in the service of the Supreme Lord. That is our spiritual nature. That's our original consciousness. That's our original nature. And there is no, in fact, influence of the time there. So then that's why it is called, we call it as eternal. So thank you so much, dear devotees. Let me stop here. And thank you so much. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. Hare Krishna. Madhuri Prabhu, back to you.
Thank you very much, Bishop. I would like to wish everybody a safe and Krishna conscious day and week ahead. I'd like to offer our prayers to the Supreme Lord by chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna,
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama,
Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna,
Hare Rama,
Hare Ram,
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna,
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.
Hare Rama, Rama
Hare Ram, Ram Ram,
Singo, Jaina Singo, Jai Jaina Singo,
Padma
Ugraviram
Narsimham Vishnam
Nrsimha Bhagwan ki Sada Maharaja ki
Jai.
Let's offer our humble obeisances to all the humble Vaishnavas.
Vanchakalpatarubhyasya Sindhubhya Nitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo
Vaishnavinda ki
Jai.
Granth Srimad Bhagavatam ki
Jai, Jai. Hari Bol.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.